The Committee on Foreign Affairs will come to order. Purpose of this hearing is to discuss the State Department's FY 2024 budget request and explore the myriad of challenges facing the United States and its diplomats around the globe. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Mr. Secretary, welcome. And we have no shortage of crises around the world for sure. And there's a lot to talk about. I believe that we are in a very dangerous period in history, the likes of which we have not seen since my father's war of World War II. After the debacle in the fall of Afghanistan, and we had a hearing on that, we saw our adversaries respond. We saw weakness, and we projected weakness, not strength. History proves when you project strength, you get peace, but when you project weakness, it does invite aggression and war. You only need to look back to Neville Chamberlain and Hitler, and really the course of time has proven that axiom. So I think we need to start projecting more strength and deterrence. We saw not too long after the fall of Afghanistan on satellite imagery, the Russian Federation moving towards Ukraine. It was never a question of if, it was a question of when with Mr. Putin. And I think from what he saw, he decided it was the time. And we saw the troop presence, and then we saw the invasion. And then we see Chairman Xi. Chairman Xi is threatening Taiwan as we speak. They both met just recently, as you know, in Moscow. I know you met with the foreign minister of China when you were at the Munich Security Conference, right after the spy balloon went over the United States, filming some of our most sensitive military nuclear sites. So this is an intense time, and we're starting to see this alliance, not very similar in my judgment to what we saw in World War II. It's Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Now Mr. Putin is begging Iran for weapons. He has the Iranian drones in Crimea. I want to get the weapons in there to take out those Iranian drones, but they don't have them because you won't give them to them. The longer range artillery to win. I don't want to see him bleed over the winter and spring. I want to see victory, not a drawn-out conflict that has no resolution in sight. The threat of communist China cannot be overstated. They are the #1 threat to long-term to our national security. It's why I introduced and passed the CHIPS Act to pull the supply chain of semiconductors out of Taiwan and China and make them here in the United States. But still, 90% of that advanced semiconductor manufacturing takes place in Taiwan. So when people ask, why is Taiwan important? Imagine if China invaded Taiwan tomorrow and controlled 90% of the global supply. We would be in a world of hurt. I personally think Chairman Xi is going to try to influence the election. If he fails, then I think Plan B will be a blockade and an invasion that will be on a scale that will make Ukraine look like a very small thing. A massive cyber attack. Taiwan is not prepared. We have no joint military exercises. The weapons I signed off on 3 years ago have yet to go into country. I don't understand why this takes so long. And if we don't have the deterrence, like we didn't have the deterrence with Ukraine, I called for sanctions and weapons before the invasion. I think we should be doing the same thing with Taiwan. We need to arm them and prepare them to provide deterrence along with AUKUS and the Quad to deter the Chinese from an invasion, which I think, again, would be devastating. Iran is at 85% enrichment. You know, the bombs dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki had 80% enrichment. They're already there, Mr. Secretary. 90%, they say, is weapons grade. What are we doing to stop this? And are we giving the Iranians a strong message that a nuclear Iran is not acceptable? We're seeing China come into the Middle East and negotiate agreements between Saudis and Iran. I haven't seen the Abraham Accords expanded at all under your tenure. But we have to make it clear to them what a nuclear Iran would mean, and we have to support Israel in that fight. Meanwhile, our president rescinded the migrant protection protocols, remained in Mexico that the State Department was involved in, which opened our borders up into a wide open invasion from the cartels that now even your own Border Patrol admit have operational control of the border. That's my home state of Texas. I've been dealing with this issue as a federal prosecutor to chairman of Homeland, and now witnessing what I'm seeing is the worst I've ever seen. You and I have talked about fentanyls, and I applaud your efforts to talk to the leadership in China about the precursors coming from China into Mexico that have killed 100,000 young people in this country just over the last year. To put that in perspective, that's more than who died in the Vietnam War. And it's an attack on our young people. So, Mr. Secretary, my time's limited. There's so many things I could talk about that I don't have time. But right now, you are in a very important position in a very important time in history. And the parallels to 1939, when I go to Poland, they say it's Hitler invading Poland all over again. They see it that way. They have Auschwitz in their backyard. They remember the war crimes, as we see war crimes taking place in Ukraine. As I went to Bucha, as you know, to see the mass grave sites, and went to Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky, and I will be going to Asia. Those two threats, the European theater and Pacific that my father's generation liberated from tyranny in strong support of freedom and democracy, are now at risk, at threat. Now they want to change the maps from what the greatest generation liberated. We cannot allow that to happen, sir. I want to work with you. We're all Americans. And I believe most members on this committee agree with that assessment. But I do have to point out my concerns, and I think the weaknesses, and we'll have more time to discuss that in our questioning. I want to just close with this, though. We had a Marine Sergeant, Vargas Andrews, testified before this committee that he had the suicide bomber in his sights before the bomb went off. He met with his team. He met with his intelligence team. An intelligence bulletin went out describing the suicide bomber. They got the identification. They got the PSYOPs. They pushed it up the chain of command, and the response was, I do not have authority to give you permission to engage against the threat. And the question was asked, well, who has the authority? I don't know. I'll have to get back to you. And guess what? Nobody got back to him. And then guess what? Just hours later, the bomb went off, killing 13 servicemen and women, 140 Afghanistans, and injuring 50, including Major Sergeant Andrews Vargas, who lost his limb, his leg, who had 40 surgeries. We have the mother of the woman, the Marine sergeant who was killed in that deadly blast. And I'll never forget giving her a hug, and she said, I'm devastated to know that this tragedy could have been prevented and my daughter could still be alive today, but for the negligence of what happened in Afghanistan that day, and I want to recognize her. Christy Shamblin, the mother of Marine Sergeant Nicole G., who was killed at Abbey Gate. She is in this room today. And let me just say to her and all the veterans of that conflict, you did not get wounded in vain. You did not die in vain. What you did was worth it because you protected America for 20 years from attacks. And I would ask that Christy Shamblin, if you could stand so you can be recognized. Now, I was told she was going to be here. There she is. Let me just close by saying, I will not rest, Christy, until we get answers, until people are held accountable for what happened to your daughter and the other servicemen and women and the Afghans. I will not rest until we get answers. And we will, if we have to go all the way up the chain of command to do it.